From here, this is what I don't see a ton of tutorials doing, and what I really wanted to talk about, which is the overall art direction for animations like these, and the behind the scenes thinking, if you will, for shots like these. You're basically selling the idea that something CG is happening in a real life scenario, and so you're using good ingredients to make something better, if that makes sense. So to get started, the very first thing that you want to do is grab a car model, or grab a model of some kind that has an interior, and I'm using BlenderKit right here in order to just grab a model really quick. And so let's hide our collection. Make sure that your cube isn't actually inside that collection. So we can hide the car, and now we've got our regular geometry here. Hit reset children, and then all we're gonna do is put some points on the faces, and I like to use poison disk and just set the distance something really low, and then turn up the density max so that we can really start to see our shape of the car. And then we'll add in a set point radius, make it something low. And then let's keep upping this geometry, maybe something crazy like 15K, just really quick, just so we can see everything. And then we're gonna go ahead and take our set point radius, and in the radius section, we're gonna add a map range, what we actually want our maximum points to be. And now that they're not overlapping each other, we can actually set that back. Here we go. So in the map range, we're actually going to set up a mask, and that's going to be the whole effect, really. So we've got an empty, and with the empty, we are going to do something super simple, where we take the distance from the object and the position of our GeoNodes object and compare it to less than, and then put the scale into the bottom of the less than, and then put this into the value of the map range. And now we have our mask. Just gonna go ahead and pin that really quick. And now we have our mask, and super simple, super easy, looks nice, and it's really fast because it's just scaling these points. It's not deleting them, which I've done in the past. Deleting can just take up a lot of memory and RAM, so doing it this way makes a lot of sense. You'll probably also notice that the wheels are a little weird on my object. I think it's really fine for this. We're gonna be really tight in here as far as the image is concerned, so I don't think it'll be a big deal. But I think the reason for that is because these are instanced wheels, and so it's like actually right here maybe is where the real object is. Once again, not a big deal, just something to watch out for. From here, I'm going to throw up a switch node and set it to viewport. Now this is really handy node. It's really nice to just have for when you go to render. I like to just throw it in there so I don't forget. But basically, you can say the true value is what you see in the viewport, and then the false value is what it's going to actually render with. And so you can, it's really weird that when you're using geometry nodes, you have to leave the effect on in the viewport in order for it to render. At least I haven't figured out a way to get that to not happen. But basically, in order for this to work accurately in the render, you have to leave the effect on. So you're taking up a ton of your computer's processing power, and then you're going to render. And so that ends up taking even longer, and it's just not worth it. So anyway, long story short, just use this switch node, and that will save you hopefully a lot of render time and a lot of headache later on. Now it looks like these are still a little too big for what we're looking for. So let's go ahead and put them down even more so we can get like an even more definitive shape as to what we're hoping this will look like. We just ramped it up to 35,000. The computer's starting to go a little slow. I think this is okay for now. I might add more later on, but regardless though, this is our effect. Hopefully you found a really good object with an interior. Can be a car, you can do a product, you can do quite a few things that'll hopefully work with this. This is the name of the game right here. So from this, we're basically just going to continue to mess with the materials and the actual animation. So we'll go set material and add a new material to this guy. Go into render mode. And when I'm doing materials, I like to just have a simple plane and a simple light. And this is usually all you need. It looks nice. It looks cinematic. You don't have to go too far. And it's just very simple. Sometimes I'll crank down the light just to have a little bit more contrast so you can see a little bit more of what's going to actually happen here. But so we've got our car. Actually, that was not the material that I wanted. Let's go ahead and put in a new material, call it point. Don't know why that happened. Set material node at the very end with the point. And the thing that I think makes the most sense for this is just a simple setup with a color ramp and a Voronoi texture. And the reason for that is just because it gives us something that looks nice, but it's also high contrast, and it'll make it seem like there is a lot more going on than there actually is. And that's, again, what people are looking for these days is just the maximum amount of detail. Here, we need to make our scale higher. All right, that's pretty good. Now we're gonna change this to distance to edge, maybe. Yes, distance to edge kind of gets us this sort of sparkly look. It makes it, again, it makes it look like there's a lot more points than there actually are. And it's just like kind of gemmy, I guess. Let's see. We just want to crank this down so that we continue to get some details in there. So we got a scale. Let's just make it a round number of 500. And I think that looks nice for right now. So that's our point. And then the last thing that has been making, that I've seen a lot of people do, is adding these HDRIs at low light. So basically I'll go into PolyHaven here and then go into HDRIs, grab an indoor or an outdoor. It doesn't really matter too much. We're kind of just looking for something that's got a flat color. I guess this is more of an all-around color. Let's see here. So here's what I typically do with my HDRIs. I come in here in the world settings, and then I will go and put the strength down to -5. We still have a lot of the reflections. Let's keep it at -5. We still have a lot of the reflections, a lot of the bounce light that keeps it realistic. Actually, let's make -3 here. Yeah, -3 is nice. You just don't want too many dark shadows. And then what we'll do is we will mix shader through a regular background that's white, and then the camera ray is on this background. So it's just a really nice way to keep things steady. The background will always look white, but if you look at the reflections, like something with the UV sphere can work. You just change this down and you see that you still have that nice HDRI. So the HDRI is still there. It's still affecting your object, but it looks nice because those reflections are still there, but without the cost of having this weird background. So now we got this nice light. You can also, again, go into PolyHaven and just add somewhat realistic material on the ground. This typically just adds some context to your model. And again, I've seen a lot of professional workflows do this. It's not a huge deal, but I think it does actually add that little element of world building that you can see in product commercials. And it works pretty easily. I think the other thing that I like to make sure that I do is not overwhelm it. So I just threw on a mixed color just to make it a little bit more white, but we still have our regular work here. And I think it just makes sense to do this. It's just a little added detail. And like I said, some professional workflows are doing it right now. It makes sense when you're watching one of these animations and you're wondering, where is this thing? Is it in rocky formation, or is there some sort of studio? It's, I guess, just another element that is going on right now. The other thing that I like to do is come in here and just, if at all possible, add in some more detail to it. So something like this. It just adds a little bit more contrast, makes it a little bit more realistic, and it costs nothing because we're using the same roughness map. So it just looks a little bit nicer. And again, that is really it for that whole element of the effect. From here, this is what I don't see a ton of tutorials doing, and what I really wanted to talk about, which is the overall art direction for animations like these, and kind of the behind the scenes thinking, if you will, for work that's similar to this. So basically what I'll do from here is I'll just really simply add a camera, go ahead and throw this into regular view mode here, and set up our camera to be vertical formats, turn it into render mode. Now we already have a couple of good ingredients, and an interesting way, I just saw this the other day, but an interesting way to think about animations like these is to think about you're using good ingredients to make something better, if that makes sense. So like we have a good model, we have a good effect, we have good materials. Overall, just by basis, we should have a good animation. And I think that makes a lot of sense when you think about it, but we'll come back to that. So we've got our camera, and what I like to do is just grab a regular empty, and so I don't get it confused with other empties, I make it an arrow empty, and I will then lock our camera, track to our camera for that empty. And now our camera is always focused on this empty that we've got, and we can animate it and do whatever we need. Under the camera settings, I almost always turn on depth of field. That's really no brainer. You probably want to try and always use depth of field if you can. And then I really like these longer lenses. They kind of flatten your image, but for product commercials, it really makes things look nicer. Common long lenses are 85 and 65, but sometimes I'll even go 150 if I want it to be hyper close up. And as you may have noticed, the empty that we're focusing on is inside of the camera. And if you're familiar with photography or anything like that, having the depth of field focus inside of your camera in a 3D space like this is really nice because you'll have depth of field on both sides, basically in the foreground and in the background. And again, it's sort of a more like realistic approach to the essence of the whole thing. So anyway, what I like to do from here is I'll basically just set a start and an end point and then try and art direct my way around it, which I've noticed is a pretty clean way. It's not always the most effective as far as control, but it can lead to a lot of iterative scenes that you might want to add later on or keep hold of. And that's really nice when you're in one of these workflows, because you can render and then come back and be like, I'll use one or two of these. So anyway, I'll just set keyframes for the size right here, and then I will go all the way to the end, and then I will just enlarge this whole guy and then probably move it as well to the center so that our entire car is showing. And that way we know that at least at the very end of our animation, we will have a full car. And I'll set that to linear so that it's just going straight across. And so this is a great starting point right here. It's really interesting. You can tell what it is right off the bat, which is, again, something important that we want to do with animations like these. We want to be intrigued, but we also want to know what we're setting ourselves up for. So as I'm looking over here, I'm also looking around with my camera to see what is an interesting shot here. I'll even rotate them together. And I think what makes a lot of sense is to focus on the seat, because it's kind of interesting again, and it definitely sets the tone for the car. And then we can also have something in the foreground, which again sets the tone for what's happening. It's an interesting sort of formation commercial, and then we'll just leave that there. Make sure you save your project. And then from here, the really easy, fast way that I like to do this is just set a marker, bind camera to marker. So marker, bind camera to marker. Control B, I don't know, never works for me. And so we know for a fact that we're operating in 30 FPS. So we're going to go in increments of 30. Sometimes you can do 45, and it just kind of depends on the speed of your animation, what you want to go for, what kind of rhythm you want to set. For cars, it's more energetic, more faster. And so you could do 45. I like to stick to 60 just because it's a little bit longer, but it's a little bit more cinematic as well too, because it takes its time, I guess. So what we'll do is we know we're going to frame 60. So we'll hit keyframe on the location. And then from here, basically what I do is, again, I'm looking for another spot to move our camera to. And it's very straightforward. You're really just art directing these scenes, and then we'll just play through. So this is the iterative process that I go through. I'll see what's working, what's not. Right now, I feel like this is not working because the subject matter of the car forming basically is really not being seen, and then this foreground element is coming over into what we're trying to showcase. So it's not as nice as it could be. So what I'll do again is I'll delete the keyframes, A to select all, and then X to delete. And then I'll basically just try to find another spot that kind of works here. Now I know that the car is not going to be forming over here. And so this foreground element right here, I know will stay consistent. And then we're also going to move the empty up maybe and just try and reframe the interesting aspect to what we want to focus on. So let's go ahead and insert that keyframe, then go to 60 again. All right. So again, this is another interesting part of this type of workflow. I think I'm going back on what I was saying earlier. I think it might make more sense to go at 45. And again, the reason for 45 is it's 30 plus 15. So it's a second and a half of animation. And I think the reason to step back like that makes sense is because it's just moving. It's moving really fast, a little bit faster than I thought it was. And so I think that's totally fine for what we're looking for. So at 45 seconds or 45 frames, we're kind of moving a little slow here. So let's actually go into the timeline and put our playback at frame dropping. And that's just going to drop the frames so they can play at the accurate speed so that we can actually see how fast our camera is moving here. So now we can tell that it's actually moving a lot faster than we originally thought it was. So we're going to go ahead, delete these one more time, and we're just going to move the camera ever so slightly. And now we're going to watch it one more time. Okay, that's a lot nicer. We just slowed down the camera, and again, that ensures that it's just the camera movement itself isn't too choppy, and it again makes it a little bit cleaner. When it comes to car animations and things like this, it's better to stay a little bit more cinematic, keep it on the edge so it's cool and fresh, so it's not really like things aren't too choppy, basically. And then from here, we're going to select the empty and the camera, and then just Shift D. And then with the camera selected, not the empty, we're going to go ahead and go back to marker, bind camera to marker, and then we automatically shift to a new camera. And then we'll delete the old keyframes. And that works pretty nice. I like that a lot. That's basically the bulk of my workflow right there, is just really duplicating and resetting the marker. And it just automatically shifts, basically editing in Blender. So it's just really nice like that. No reason to worry or anything. So now we're going in here, and this is one of the shots that I was a little bit more excited for. So I'm going to come in here and try and make sure that I really get this how I was hoping that it would go. Basically, I'm just looking for like sort of formation animation where it's just the points are coming towards us, or they're like going towards a destination. So we're just going to go ahead and watch that really quick. So it's pretty nice. It's almost the time that we have. And again, it's moving really fast, but it should be okay for what we're planning on here. So we'll go ahead and keyframe our camera and then go to 90 because we've already set ourselves up for 45. So we want to keep the flow steady by adding another 45. That's just like a common trope where you make sure that you keep the frames in line with one another so that it's just like back to back. If you use different timing, it's totally okay, but you want to make sure that you use it really intentionally. So I tend to keep it the same as much as I can. So we got here, we're going to go ahead and animate the camera. And it looks like our subject is out of focus. And I think we moved the empty back. Okay, so we'll animate the empty as well. See how that looks. We'll change it to linear interpolation again. And now let's watch it. Sometimes animating the empty along with the camera can distort the camera movement that you want. For shots like these, you're basically selling the idea that something CG is happening in a real life scenario. And so that's what a lot of commercials go for these days, at least. They want you to try and question if it's real. And it's just a stylistic thing. But if your camera is moving in an unorthodox way, it can really take the viewer out of, I guess this is a fake 3D camera. I think for this, though, it should work. Maybe not. And again, the reason why this might not work is because it's two scenes going back to back. There's one really slow scene with something cool happening in the background, and then we're speeding up here with our camera, and that kind of takes us out of it. So what I'm going to do is see if I can just delete the camera movement and see if that helps us at all. looks like it does not. So what we're gonna do actually is delete both the camera and the empty movement. And then we're gonna pull the camera out because again, I really kind of see this effect in action. So I'm gonna take this way down so that we're really just focusing on the effect itself. I'm gonna put a keyframe right there, go back to 90, put a keyframe right there. And again, when I'm finding these spots, I'm really just trying to see what's most interesting. There's not a perfect exact science to it unless you're considering composition. But even then, you're really just looking for what might be an interesting thing to watch, I guess, as far as your animation is concerned. And then I'm also going to animate the empty, but it's going to be coming towards the camera, so it hopefully will look a little bit more realistic and not as jarring. And the way to do that is to minimize the amount of panning that's going on. Let's go ahead and watch this again. There we go. That's a lot better. So the reason why that's better is because we start slow. Obviously this is an effect that's going on, but then things speed up, but it's not too jarring, right? We can see ourselves coming into something else again here. This would be a good next scene to watch. And again, you don't entirely need a camera every time to art direct your next scene, right? Like you can just look here in the viewport, and that's the beauty of working with geometry nodes. You can see your effect happening in real time, and that really helps. Oh, that would be perfect, actually. This is a really good scene right here, because you can very visually tell that that's a car light forming, and so that'll be great to focus on. So again, we'll go back to camera. Sometimes I am smart with my collections and actually put things in the right place. So I'll make a collection and just call it cameras. I definitely suggest you get into the habit of naming your stuff correctly because it's a hard habit to break out of. So we'll make sure we're set up right here. Then we're going to duplicate. And again, make sure the camera itself is selected. And then select marker, bind camera to marker. And there we go. We've already got another cut automatically waiting for us in the timeline. I'm going to go ahead and delete those old keyframes. And then we want to set our camera up where we know that light's going to be forming at. Great. And it looks like we might be a little early to the party here. So let's see here. 90. So this is kind of a rule of thumb that I use. Sometimes I don't always stick to it, but if you've got two back-to-back that are the same length for each other, you can then go into another series that's a little bit longer. So 60 instead of 45. So from 90, I might go 150, just depending on the shot. And then I know that that will be another increment of 30, but it's just a little bit longer. And that kind of goes more into the flow and animation theory and just like the different way you want your shots to look. But it can be really helpful to keep those in mind early on as you're in here creating different shots. So I think I'm going to come from this way because it's forming in this direction, left to right. So I think I want the final frame to be around here so we can really focus on what's going on. And then we'll go back to see our original frame. And now we've got an issue because obviously the empty is really far from where we want it to be up here. And so we've got two choices. We can either have our empty be animated or figure out a way to set the boundary in the middle. It really just depends on what looks nice for the animation overall. Let's see here. So we'll go ahead and watch it. Yeah, not really a fan of that. So what I'm gonna do is delete both keyframes and try and find a better alternative angle for what we're trying to achieve here. So we know for a fact that the car is forming right here. So I will start it out in the open and then animate it to 150 just like this. And it's okay to start a little bit off your subject. It creates intrigue if you have off starting point. Again, it's just feel the vibe, the style that you're going for. Sometimes it can work, sometimes it looks weird. So you just gotta keep them in mind. But if your effect starts a little bit off screen and then comes into screen, it can be really interesting as well. It just depends, again, on what you're going for. So let's watch this. So I think that's a good spot for where we want to end, although it's not a great spot to begin. And it looks like our camera's moving really fast too. Camera's moving way too fast there. And again, this is part of the process. I think it's good to showcase this sort of workflow. It's not always cut and dry and pretty. It's messy and you don't always get the look that you want, but I think it can make a lot of sense to show these types of things. So let's try this one. There we go. Much better. Again, the reason why that's better is we can see in the background that the car is forming towards us. So there's sort of a layer of anticipation. If you're familiar with animation, that's really good because then we have a payoff. And now, because it's forming through us as the viewer, we now know to expect something more to be happening, if that makes sense. So it's kind of like a drive-by, right? As the viewer, we're watching something happen and it's driving by us or it's going by us. And so our brains naturally think to not only anticipate the action, but then to wait for more of a follow-up action to occur. Great. And again, keep it really simple. Camera and empty selected, Shift D, make sure the camera's selected, and then just make another marker, bind cameras to marker. At this point, it makes a lot of sense to go back and just watch the flow of things, make sure it's all working. Watch your viewport and then watch your render as well to see if things have changed at all. Okay. Okay, I think that's working for us right now. This is a little dark, and so I want to go back and see if it's okay to adjust the lighting. Now, there's two ways to do this. You can either make it more contrasty, which will lighten things up, but it'll also make your shadows darker, or you can just add more light in general, and that's totally fine, but when you're using a material like this, it can kind of blend into the background, so we just want to make sure that we're not blending too much into the background there. And then we come back to here, part of the scene that we wanted to light up, and it's not really lit up too much. So let's go ahead and actually morph the light itself to the thing that we're trying to light up. And so we'll basically scale it, and that makes a lot more sense. We have a lot more light up here than we did before, so that's great. So we'll keep it that way. Check our other scenes just to make sure we didn't mess with the lighting too much, and it looks nice. So now we are looking for next scene, and also just in case you need a little of encouragement, we're more than halfway through our animation, so that's good to know. Let's see here. This is an interesting spot. We have these sort of back of the car forming and coming towards us, which can look really nice. So that's what we'll do. Take our last camera, bring it over here, make sure that we delete the keyframe so it doesn't snap back to where it was, and we'll go to the actual frame that we're starting on here. Something interesting that I've been doing lately is can the camera look a little stylized. Again, you have to be careful because it can really mess with things, but if you're in the track 2 constraint over here with the camera, you can press target Z. And again, that's another little nice thing about having the empty. In the axis view, you can actually see where the Z is. And so you can create these just a little bit more dynamic shots that can look a little bit better and create a little bit more interest than you might get otherwise. Again, you just have to be careful with it. What we're gonna do here is we're gonna set up our camera to see the spot that we wanna see. Maybe a good top down like this might work. Go ahead and save it and then see what this animation actually entails. So it's cutting out in front of us. So let's make sure that we have a spot that we're actually going to see the full effect here. I think what I'll do is I'll actually zoom out again, or maybe just adjust the stops because it's just a little bit too shallow for the look that I'm thinking of here. Again, if you're based in photography at all, the f-stops is basically how much defocus is going through your camera lens, and it's really great because that's how actual cameras work, but it's also important to know when and when not to use it. So for instance like this, we want to be able to see a little bit more of the screen and we want it to be dynamic, and so by putting the f-stops higher, we're getting less blur, which can make it look less realistic, but it's also kind of nice in this instance because it's helping us to see the actual thing that we're trying to see. So again, I'm just trying to art direct a little bit of what we're going. And now that we're here, actually, I'm noticing that this plane doesn't stretch as far as I'd like it to. So we're gonna go ahead and just scale that up a bit here so that we don't see the plane out there looking weird. Let's see, so we're at 150. our previous stretch here was 60 seconds. So we know for a fact that we're going to go all the way out to 210 for this scene. And I really want to make sure that I am catching all this, because this is a really nice shape that's forming here on the car. So I want to make sure that we're catching all of it. Let's see, kind of like that. So we've rotated the camera. Basically what we're going to do here is we're going to keep it in place and rotate it just a bit more. And what we can also do is move this out, because we know that the f-stop isn't going to be bothering it, and we can anticipate the action. So that's really great. Let's go back to frame 150 and keyframe, and then go to frame 210 and then keyframe again. Just a little bit of movement is all you really need to sell shots like these. And then I'm going to come back to here actually and get a sense for the flow that's going on. Nice. That's really nice. So again, the sense of flow is what's happening both for the subject and then also what's happening for the camera too. We want to make sure that flow is really aligned with both. Obviously, we know that the object is going at the same rate, and so that's good. And then we just need to make sure that the cameras themselves are also going at the right rate. Great. And now at this point, we've had a lot of close-up shots. And so I think so it's really smart to make sure that we're also getting some zoomed out shots, because we've basically this whole animation been hyping up this cool car formation, but we haven't really had any payoff yet. So we want to make sure that we use the last two spots for that sort of payoff that we really want to give to the viewers for sticking around and actually watching the whole video start to finish. So we'll Shift D, make sure the camera's selected. Again, go to marker, bind camera to marker, and then we will delete keyframes. And then to turn this guy back around, we will just zero out the rotation, and that brings us right back. So a good place to continue both the story and, again, reveal that this is a car is probably going to be the front or the back. We just showcased the back, so why don't we go to the front again, rotate around, bring it here. And so because we need to see a little bit more of our car, we're going to turn the focal length down so it's a little bit wider. And this part really sells itself, obviously, because, again, going back to the cooking analogy, we have a good model, we have a good effect, we have a lot of good things going on, so it kind of sells itself at points like these. And so all we need to do really is just find a good spot, more or less. Looks like our camera is a bit rotated, maybe? Weird. Oh, it's because we rotated the empty. Make sure you don't rotate your empty, otherwise you get weird camera angles. So I think the shot looks really nice where it's just bisected. Again, to view it without any lines, you just press show overlays up here, and that will help you better art direct your scene. I think that looks nice. Pretty simply, we'll go here, and then we're going to 300, and we've got 90 frames left. So I think it might make sense to actually come in here and divide it by 2 again. So we're gonna go from 210 to 255. Again, that's going in 45 frames, so it's a 1.5 seconds. And I think that just makes sense. Bookends, we started with 45s, then we went to 60s, and now we'll be ending with 45s. Just little stuff like that. It really helps the flow, sells the idea, depending on what you're going for. And we get to see the last part of the car form, which is really nice as well. Again, so sometimes these animations just really sell themselves, and that looks really nice. And then I think for the last part of it here, I'm just going to Shift D again, as we've been doing. Make sure the camera's selected, marker, bind cameras to marker, delete the keyframes, and then I think for this last shot, all I'm going to do is come up here and put it straight over the top. Shots like these can look really nice, especially whenever you're working in a specific format. We are. So we've got our car camera. We want to go 0, or sorry, we don't want to go 0 on the Y. I want to go 0 on the X maybe. There we go. Let's go 0 on the Y one more time. And it looks like the issue is probably our empty that we're looking at. Just need to be zeroed out. Perfect. That's really simple, straightforward. And then we're just going to get another overlook here. And that, again, just sells the fact that this is, in fact, a car animation, and it also looks nice. It's a zoomed out shot, and it makes sense. So we'll go ahead and watch it all together. Nice, speedy, interesting. Oh, it is a car. Nice. for animation. Maybe you put some text down here, text up here, and that's your product commercial. For rendering, I always render in a PNG format, which I'm sure many of you guys know. Sometimes I'll change the look to higher contrast. You just got to be careful. If your shadows are already subtle in here, you don't want to go too high contrast. So you go like a medium maybe, and then that just kind of sells the effect. The other thing that we want to go to is what we were talking about originally with the geometry nodes, which is the viewport switch. So right now our viewport is 30K, 35K, and our render is false, so it's 25. So we definitely don't want that. We want to render more than what we're seeing. So oops, we've got 35,000. That's what we've been art directing with. So we don't want to go too crazy, but let's check out 55. Make sure you save before you jump the gun on crazy geometry nodes. And then just take a look. Sometimes it depends on what looks nice, what effect you're going for. If you add too many points, then you risk not being able to see the fact that these are actually points that are forming. It just turns into little weird blobs. So you don't want that. You can also come in here and just look at the max radius. So right now we're at 0.005. We can go down 0.004. Just adds a little bit more difference, a little bit more randomization. I think it looks nice. What I almost always like to do is just get one shot where things are out of left field crazy. So I'll just go in and do 125K, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I think it can look nice if you do it correctly, but just remember it's got to work for your PC and everything else that you have going on. I don't think that we need it though, so I'm going to keep it at 55. I think it just looks a little bit more interesting to have these sort of randomized little dots going everywhere. So we'll keep it on that, save. So again, the whole point of this was to make sure that we have less points than we do in the render. So we'll go back to true, change it to something small like 5K, and we'll keep it there. Back to render, I almost always use samples of 150, 120 to 150, and just keep it there. Performance, I'll use persistent data because we're rendering an animation, and that almost always speeds things up. I don't really mess with too much else. Let's see, it's a PNG sequence. Some people like to use OpenEXR, it just depends on how you color grade. I think for something like this, PNG is totally fine. And then I will go to percentage and put in 150. The reason why I put in 150 is it renders it at a larger scale. And then when you go in, you can push that scale down. It's an easier way to get more fidelity, more crisp images without using more render samples. And it's actually pretty industry standard to render at a higher resolution and then scale down, if you didn't know that. And then from there, that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching.